I used to believe that motherhood was a role without an expiration date, that if I loved enough, sacrificed long enough, there would always be a place for me in my child's heart. But I was wrong. After my husband passed away, I moved in with my daughter. I cooked, did laundry, looked after the grandchildren, and little by little, my presence became a hindrance, a camera she found intrusive. In the eyes of the very daughter I once carried in my womb. One day, she bluntly told me I was a burden and asked me to leave her home. I left quietly and in pain, but eventually, I found myself again somewhere else. And when my daughter came back into my life, I was no longer the silent mother I used to be. Before I continue the story, leave a comment, because maybe, just maybe, my story was once yours too. If you asked me, the moment I started to feel invisible, I'd tell you it was the day I sat at Rachel's kitchen table and she wouldn't look me in the eye. I was spooning cold oatmeal into my mouth, and she stood by the sink with her back to me, rinsing dishes that were already clean. The air between us wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like wet laundry that never dried all the way. James had been gone for 6 months. I still sometimes reached for his side of the bed in the middle of the night, forgetting I was alone. Grief has a cruel sense of humor. 1 minute you're fine, folding towels or boiling water for tea, and the next, you're doubled over from an ache that has no name. Rachel's voice broke through one evening while we were sitting in my old living room. I still remember the flicker of pity in her eyes when she said, "Mom, you can't keep living like this. Come stay with us, at least for a while." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the floor, then at the photograph on the mantel. James in his Sunday suit, squinting at the sun on the day we renewed our vows. 38 years of marriage. You don't just box that up and move on. But I did pack it up. The picture, his watch, the shirt he wore to our last church picnic, all went into a single suitcase. I told myself it wasn't forever. Just until I got my bearings. Maybe rent a little place outside of town, near the grocery store and the park. Maybe somewhere with a little porch. Still, I said yes. Mostly because of Emma, Rachel's daughter, my only granddaughter. She was 10, with wild curls and a laugh that made me forget I was grieving. I didn't want to miss her growing up. That mattered more than any rented apartment. The day I moved in, Rachel was already out in the driveway, arms crossed, trying to smile. Her husband, Mark, carried in the heavier boxers without much talk. I noticed the small things right away. The second bedroom I was staying in had once been Mark's home office. The desk was still there, pushed against the wall. There was a single dresser and a twin bed. No curtains, just blinds. I stood in the middle of that room holding the wedding photo frame with the worn-down corners, and for the first time in a long while, I realized I had no place to set it. No shelf, no nightstand. It just stayed in my hands for a while, until Rachel knocked lightly and said, "Dinner's ready." That first week was all right. Emma would run into my room in the mornings, crawl up into my bed and whisper stories about her dreams. She liked that I made real oatmeal on the stove instead of microwaving it. Rachel worked from home, so she was always in the kitchen or on her laptop at the dining table, taking calls and scribbling notes. I tried to help. I folded laundry, did the dishes, cooked dinner a few times, but I noticed how Rachel would refold the towels, redo the plates in the dishwasher. Not rude, just quiet corrections. Then one night, I overheard something. I was coming down the stairs after putting Emma to bed when I heard Rachel and Mark in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but sharp. "She just shows up in the morning, rearranging the kitchen drawers. It's like she's taking over." "She's your mother," Mark said, sounding tired. "She just lost her husband." I know, but she doesn't live here. Not really. She's just always around." I didn't go down for tea that night. I told myself maybe they were stressed. Maybe I'd been too eager. I tried staying in my room more after that. I watched TV with headphones on, started knitting again, but no matter how careful I was, the feeling stuck that I was being tolerated, not wanted. The worst was the day Emma stopped coming to my room. I don't know what Rachel said to her, but I noticed the change. She knocked now, called me grandma instead of Nana. She hugged me at arm's length, like I was someone she'd been warned about. One Saturday, I baked a peach cobbler, James' favorite. I used to make it every summer, from scratch. I even went out of my way to find good ripe peaches at the market. I left it on the counter to cool and waited for someone to notice. Rachel came in, looked at it, and said, "Mom, we don't really do sugar desserts anymore. Emma has sensitivities." I nodded, said nothing. That cobbler sat there all day, untouched. I ended up wrapping it in foil and putting it in the fridge. A week later, I threw it out. After that, I stopped cooking. I started to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, but no one said anything outright. That's the American way sometimes. We avoid direct confrontation like the plague, but we let the silence do the screaming. There was a morning, cold, gray, one of those days where even the sky seems to give up, that I sat at the kitchen table, oatmeal untouched in front of me. Rachel was making coffee, but not a word passed between us. I looked up just once to catch her gaze, but she turned away, busying herself with the creamer bottle. That was the moment. Right there. That silence. That avoidance. That's when I knew I had disappeared in my own daughter's home. I still smiled when Emma came by, still nodded when Mark made small talk. But in my chest, I started building a little room of my own, inside my own heart, where I kept James' memory alive, where I folded my grief like linens and told myself I still mattered. I didn't cry, not then. But later that night, behind the locked door of the guest room, I pulled out the wedding photo. I held it against my chest and whispered to James, I brought our past with me, but no one needs it here. And that was the first time I felt like I wasn't living in a home, but in a museum of myself. At first, life at Rachel's house wasn't bad. In fact, I'd even say it was peaceful, familiar in a way I hadn't felt in months. I got up early, made breakfast, watered the garden, folded laundry before anyone even asked. Rachel and her husband, Henry, were always in a rush, work, calls, errands, so it felt good to be useful. I made myself part of the rhythm of that house. Most evenings, after the dinner dishes were done and the kitchen was wiped down, I'd sit on the carpet with Lily and Caleb, my grandchildren, 7 and 9, and we'd build castles out of blocks, or make up bedtime stories. Caleb liked when I used funny voices. Lily liked to make up endings that were always better than mine. I cherished those moments, I really did. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was starting a new chapter of life that still had meaning. But as with most good things, it didn't last. The first shift was so subtle, I almost missed it. One Friday evening, Rachel was setting up for a little get-together. I could smell the shrimp dip and hear the clinking of wine glasses. I asked, "Need help setting the table?" She smiled politely but said, "No thanks, Mom. It's just a few friends from work. We'll keep it casual." I didn't think too much of it at first. But then it happened again and again. The house would buzz with laughter and footsteps. I'd hear heels clicking across the floor, music floating through the walls. But no one ever knocked on my door. No one ever said, "Come out, join us, meet my mother." One night, I overheard Rachel telling someone, "Oh, that's just my mom. She's staying with us for a bit." Like a long-term guest. A guest, that word felt sharp, like a pin pressed under the skin. I wasn't a guest. I was her mother. I had raised her, changed her diapers, sat up with her when she had a fever, stayed up nights so she could sleep through her heartbreaks. I had a drawer in that house, a closet with hangers, a toothbrush in the bathroom, but somehow, I was still just visiting. Then came the dinner. It was a simple Sunday night meal. Rachel made roast chicken. I wore a green dress, nothing fancy, just soft cotton. James always loved that color on me, said it brought out my eyes. I hadn't worn it since the funeral. I thought maybe it was time. Rachel looked me up and down and frowned. She said, keeping her voice low but sharp, "Don't you think you should wear something simpler? You don't need to draw attention." Draw attention. I was sitting at the family table, next to my grandchildren, cutting carrots into stars. What attention was I drawing? Still, I went upstairs after dinner and changed into gray. After that, I noticed the decisions being made without me. Dinner plans, holiday shopping, school pickups, all arranged behind closed doors. I'd find out about them last minute, or not at all. Once, I heard that Caleb had a school project due, and I offered to help. I used to be a teacher, you know. Reading comprehension was my specialty. "He's struggling a bit with context clues," I said gently. "I can spend some time with him if you'd like." Rachel didn't even look up from her phone. "They teach things differently now, Mom. I don't want to confuse him with outdated methods." Outdated, that word sat heavy in my gut. Every time I tried to offer something, a suggestion, a recipe, a memory, I was met with polite dismissal, like I was being handled, like I was fragile. or worse, obsolete. So I stopped trying. The house still had lights, still had music. Caleb's sneakers still squeaked across the hardwood floor, and Lily still giggled with her mouth full of cereal. But I stayed quiet. I sat in the corner of the living room, my knitting in my lap, eyes on the window instead of the room. The shadows in that house began to feel familiar. They were the only things that didn't look away. There was a night, chilly leaves scratching the windows, when I came down to the kitchen for tea. Rachel had gone to bed. Henry was still watching the news, half asleep in his recliner. I stood at the sink, pouring hot water into my mug, and I caught my reflection in the dark window. Just a figure, a blur, a woman-shaped shadow with gray hair and tired shoulders. I whispered, "Is this what I've become?" Not to anyone in particular, just to the silence. Even the photos in the house, Rachel's wedding, Caleb's soccer team, Lily in her Halloween costume, none of them included me. I wasn't in the frame. I was behind it, always just behind. One afternoon, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. Lily came out and sat beside me. She was quiet, chewing on her thumb. "Nana," she said, "why don't you come to the park with us anymore?" I looked at her sweet, freckled face and said, "I don't know, honey. Maybe your mom forgot to ask." She nodded like that made perfect sense, and leaned her head against my arm. We sat like that until the sun dipped behind the trees. It was the most seen I'd felt in weeks. But the truth stayed the same. The lights in the house were always on. The laughter, the motion, the life, it was all there. But I was not. I was just a shadow moving through the rooms, a quiet presence no one really turned toward. Not out of cruelty, just neglect. The kind that seeps in slow, like a leak. Under the sink you don't notice until the boards are warped and the smell won't leave. I used to think love meant being needed. Now I was learning that sometimes being forgotten is quieter than hate, but it hurts just the same. I woke up that morning with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in months. The kind that sits deep in your bones and says, today means something. It was just after 5 a.m., and the house was still asleep. Even the birds hadn't started up yet. I wrapped a shawl over my shoulders and padded quietly down the stairs. That old cast iron Dutch oven, the one James and I bought in New Orleans 30 years ago, still sat nestled at the bottom of my suitcase, wrapped in a faded tea towel. I hadn't touched it since the move. It still smelled faintly of paprika and stories I'd almost forgotten. I set it on the counter and made a grocery list like it was a map home. Shrimp, andouille sausage, chicken thighs, long grain rice, bell peppers, celery, crushed tomatoes, a little cayenne, no saffron. This was jambalaya, southern, messy, loud, and full of heart, just like us. I wrote it all out with care, the way a painter prepares a canvas. This wasn't just dinner. This was a piece of me I wanted to share. Back when Rachel was little, we used to make jambalaya together every summer. James would slice the sausage, Rachel would pretend the bell peppers were flower petals, and I'd let her sprinkle the rice like it was fairy dust. James used to joke, "You make the best jambalaya in the whole damn country. Ellie Dot's so good I forgot you nearly burned the house down yesterday with that microwave popcorn." I smiled at that memory while tying my scarf, heading to the store just after sunrise. The sky was still pale and sleepy. I took my time, picking out the shrimp, with care, checking for the ones with clear eyes and firm shells. I even asked the butcher to give me the plumpest chicken pieces. For the veggies, I went to the farmer's market 2 blocks further. I wanted everything to taste just right. By the time I got back, the house was stirring. Rachel passed me in the hallway, still in her robe, on her way to her laptop. "What's all this?" she asked. "Just cooking something special," I said, with a soft smile. "Jambalaya. Remember how we used to?" But she was already halfway to her call. "Sounds nice," she said without looking back. I spent the next few hours dicing, stirring, layering. The pot steamed up like a hymn. Onions, bell peppers, celery, the holy trinity of every meal James ever loved. I browned the sausage, let the rice soak up the heat, stirred in the shrimp last so they'd stay tender. The house began to smell like Louisiana summers, like Sunday kitchens and second chances. I even let Caleb stir the rice for a minute when he wandered into the kitchen wide-eyed. "What's this, Nana?" he asked. "A magic dinner," I whispered, "from when your mummy was your age." His grin was worth every sore muscle in my back. When I finally carried the heavy pan to the table, golden rice glistening, shrimp pink and perfect, steam curling up like a warm sigh, I felt proud, not just of the food, but of the memory I was trying to pass on. Rachel walked in with her phone, still in her hand. She glanced at the table and raised an eyebrow. "Oh," she said, "you cooked a lot. Just so you know, Henry's eating out with a client tonight. You might have overdone it." And just like that, the warmth in my chest turned cold. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, sat down quietly, folded the napkin on my lap like I hadn't been holding my breath for her to notice, for her to remember. But the kids saved me that night. Lily took one bite and her eyes lit up. "It tastes like that fairy tale stew you told us, Nana, the one with the pirate who only eats food cooked in treasure pots." Caleb was already on his second spoonful, mumbling between bites. "This is the best rice ever." I smiled. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt, but inside I was crying. The kind of cry that doesn't come with tears, just a deep, hollow ache. I kept thinking of that night in the old house when James had said, "You make jambalaya so good, it ought to be illegal." We were standing barefoot in the kitchen, dancing to some old Motown record, the kids already asleep. He'd kissed me, right there by the sink, rice grains still stuck in my apron folds. Now I sat at this bright, modern dining table, across from a daughter who used to love my cooking, and I felt like a stranger offering food no one had asked for. After dinner, Rachel cleared her plate and said, "Thanks, Mom, but next time, just a heads up, okay? We've got a routine now, and big meals like this can kind of throw things off." I didn't answer. I just started scooping the leftovers into containers, quietly, like a ghost washing the dishes in someone else's kitchen. Later that night, alone in the guest room, I took out the photo again, James in his blue flannel shirt, holding a plate of my jambalaya with that goofy grin. He looked proud, like I mattered. I whispered, "I made it for you today, love," and the kids liked it. So maybe that's enough. But the truth is, it wasn't, because what I really wanted was to be seen, not just tolerated, not just Mom, who sometimes cooks too much. I wanted Rachel to remember that I was more than a houseguest with old recipes. I was her mother. I still had love to give, lessons to share, stories to tell. The lights in the house were on. The table was full, but somewhere between the rice and the silence, I realized I'd been left off the guest list again. And no matter how much saffron I used, I couldn't season my way back in. Nights got long in that house. Too long. I'd lie there, eyes wide open, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. There was a clock on the wall, one of those quiet ones with a soft tick-tick. But when you're alone in the dark, even soft sounds feel like hammer blows. Every tick was like a reminder, you don't belong here. You're just ... passing time. I could hear the whole house breathing while it slept. The furnace kicked on with a hum. A dog barked down the street. Caleb rolled over in his bed, sometimes talking in his sleep. But me, I just lay still, hands crossed on my chest like a ghost that never got buried right. One night, I heard them. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. It was past midnight, and I was headed to the kitchen for some warm milk. I paused when I heard Rachel's voice downstairs. Not loud, but sharp. Tired in a way that didn't sound like just work. "I can't keep doing this, Henry," she said. "It's like I have to manage everything she does. Every move, every sentence. It's like living with a surveillance camera." Henry didn't answer right away. I imagined him rubbing his face like he always did when she talked too fast. "She's just trying to help," he finally said, soft. "Well, I didn't ask for help," Rachel snapped. "I didn't ask for this at all." I stood there, frozen, outside my door, hand pressed to my chest like it could stop the breaking. I wasn't angry. I was humiliated. You live long enough, you start to think you've earned a little space, a little respect. But in that moment, I felt like a mistake. An old ghost. They were too polite to ask to leave. That night, I didn't drink the milk. I didn't cry either. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall until the sun rose. Some nights were softer, though. Lily would come crawling into my bed in the middle of the night, warm and half asleep. Her curls, damp with sweat from dreams. "Nana," she whispered once, "don't go. I dreamed you got lost at the store and I couldn't find you." I held her tight, tighter than I should have. I didn't say, "I'm already lost, sweetheart." I just said, "I'm right here." She was the only one in that house who ever made me feel seen, not for what I used to be or what I could offer, just ... seen. But those moments were rare. Mostly, I felt like wallpaper. Quiet, present, forgotten. I started writing in a little notebook I kept tucked in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. It wasn't a diary, not exactly, more like a record. I wrote down every small thing I did, watered the basil, cleaned the kids' shoes, folded towels, even the ones in the back of the dryer, reminded Caleb to bring his science book, not for praise, not even to prove anything, but just to remind myself I still did things, that I wasn't just a presence in the room, that I had worth. Sometimes I'd flip through the pages, reading my own handwriting like a stranger. Small things, invisible things, but they were mine. I wrote, washed Rachel's coffee cup. Again, I wrote, checked the mail before they got home, threw out the junk so they wouldn't have to. I wrote, said nothing when she rolled her eyes at my sweater. I wrote, didn't cry until the laundry room door was closed. It's strange, the things we do to prove we matter. Back when James was alive, if I couldn't sleep, I'd nudge him and say, you awake? And even if he wasn't, he'd say, I am now, and pull me close. Sometimes, we'd talk until dawn about nonsense. Sometimes he'd hum, just low enough for me to drift off to. Now, there was no one to hum, no arms to lean into, just the sound of a ticking clock and the quiet ache of being needed less and less every day. One night, I found myself whispering out loud, what am I even doing here, James? The room didn't answer, but the silence felt like it nodded. Maybe I stayed because I thought Rachel needed me. Or maybe I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. But somewhere in the stillness of those nights, I started to see the truth. I wasn't staying for them. I was staying despite them, holding on to scraps of meaning, like old photographs that no one wants to frame. That next morning, I put on lipstick, just a little, wore my favorite scarf. No one noticed, but I did, because sometimes the only person who can pull you back from the edge is yourself. And that day, I reminded myself I was still a woman, still a mother, still a soul worth something, even if no one else said it out loud. And that night, I slept. For real, maybe not long, maybe not deep, but I slept, because that was the night I finally admitted I was disappearing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to do something about it. I suppose there's only so much a person can swallow before something inside them just gives. I'd been swallowing things for months, swallowing the quiet dismissals, the way Rachel wouldn't meet my eyes when I spoke, the constant feeling that I was a piece of old furniture no one had the heart to toss. But I held it in, told myself it was grief, or transition, or just bad timing, until that Saturday afternoon. Rachel was hosting some sort of gathering, people from her company, I think, the kind that show up in business casual clothes and drink white wine while standing around granite countertops pretending to laugh at things that aren't funny. I was wearing a soft blue cardigan, the one James used to say brought out the kindness. In my eyes, I had even baked a tray of lemon squares, Rachel's childhood favorite. But as I was setting the plate down near the edge of the dining table, Rachel swooped in, eyes wide with panic. Mama, she hissed, could you please just stay in your room tonight? I blinked, thought maybe I heard wrong. What? I said, quietly. She tucked a loose hair behind her ear, glanced toward the hallway like someone might overhear. Just tonight, okay? I don't want to explain to everyone who you are or why you're here. They'll think, she paused. They might assume you're just the live-in help. She smiled like it was a joke, but it wasn't. My heart dropped so fast I thought it hit the floor. I managed a small nod. Of course, sweetheart, I said. My voice didn't even shake. I'm proud of that. I walked back to my room with that plate of lemon squares still in my hands, closed the door behind me, sat on the bed. I didn't eat, didn't cry, just sat there for what must have been 2 hours while laughter and clinking glasses filled the house around me. I told myself it was just one night, but the real blow came later. I was in the hallway the next morning, folding laundry, when I heard Rachel and Henry in the kitchen again, talking louder than usual. I wasn't trying to listen, but I couldn't move. Something in me already knew this was it. Rachel was angry, tired, her voice sharp like cracked glass. She's always here, she said. She watches everything I do, hovers around the kids, rearranges things in the kitchen like it's her house. She means well, Henry said gently. Rachel slammed a cabinet. That doesn't matter. I feel smothered. I can't raise my kids with her in the room all the time. I can't breathe. Then she said it. Honestly, I think she's just a burden. She gets in the way of everything. Raising the kids, Henry's work, even my own sanity. She's not helping. She's just in the way. I dropped the towel I was folding. It fell like a feather, but the sound was thunder in my ears. I backed away from the hallway, moved silently to my room like I wasn't supposed to exist, like a shadow slipping out of frame. That day, I didn't speak. I didn't eat. I didn't answer Lily's knock at my door when she came to show me a drawing of a castle she made. I just sat. That evening, when the house was finally quiet, I took out the little blue stationery I'd brought from my old home. The one James had given me for our 40th anniversary. I used to write him letters on it, little notes I'd tuck in his lunchbox. This time, I wrote to my daughter. Rachel, you said I'm in the way, that I'm a burden, that I'm holding you and your family back. So I'll do the only thing left I can do to help. I'll remove myself. Not out of shame, not because you hurt me, though you did, but because I still have something you don't seem to recognize in me anymore. Dignity. I came here after losing the man I built my life with. I came here thinking family would catch me when I couldn't stand, but it turns out I'm standing alone. You won't have to explain me to your guests anymore. You won't have to worry about what I rearrange, or what I cooked, or how I speak to your children. I'm leaving, not because I'm defeated, but because I refuse to stay where I'm not wanted. I hope one day you'll understand that love isn't always convenient. It doesn't always show up the way you prefer. But it's still love, and I have loved you every day of your life. Even now, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, slid it under her bedroom door just before dawn. Then I packed. I didn't take everything, just the essentials. My copper jambalaya pan, a few photos of James, that notebook I kept hidden in the drawer, filled with proof that I was not useless. I called a cab before anyone woke up, sat quietly in the back seat as we drove away from the house I had once imagined I'd grow old in. I didn't look back. You don't have to look back to know when something's over. As we passed the edge of the neighborhood, the sun broke over the rooftops, gentle and golden. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It felt like the first one I'd taken in a long time. I didn't know where I'd go yet. Maybe a little apartment with a balcony. Maybe a place near the library, or a park bench where I could write letters to myself. Maybe somewhere that would remind me I still have worth. But I did know this much. I was no one's burden. And I would never let anyone make me feel that way again. The morning after I slipped the letter under Rachel's door, I woke up with a strange stillness inside me. Not peace, exactly. Something quieter, like the silence that comes after a long storm. Not calm, but clean. I made myself a small cup of coffee and sipped it by the window. The sun was rising over the back fence, casting soft light over the garden I used to tend. It was overgrown now, the rosemary reaching for the walkway, the basil long since gone to seed. I felt like that basil, something that had once belonged, once grown with purpose, now left to shrivel without use. As I stood there, the quiet hum of my phone buzzed from the desk. A name popped up that I hadn't seen in years. Amelia Harper. Amelia and I taught together back in the 90s. Two stubborn women with chalk-stained skirts and a shared coffee thermos we guarded like gold. We hadn't spoken in a while, life having pulled us down separate paths. But that morning she had sent me an email. Martha, I don't know if this is still your address, but I hope it is. I'm working with a local center that helps kids with learning challenges, reading, comprehension, language. We need someone who knows how to teach from the heart. Someone patient, someone like you. It's just a few hours a week, nothing fancy, but it could mean a lot to them. Let me know. I'd love to see you again. Amelia. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something that felt almost forgotten. Hope. I hadn't heard someone say they needed me in so long, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because of who I was. I sat down on the bed to think, and as I shifted the old box of keepsakes on the floor, a folded envelope slid free from the corner. It was yellowed, soft at the edges. I recognized James' handwriting before I even picked it up. Martha, for when you forget who you are. It was a letter. I'd read it once before, years ago, after a big fight when I'd doubted myself. Somehow, it had followed me here, buried under memories and grief. I unfolded it with shaking fingers and read his words again, like prayer. If the day ever comes, when you feel like you've disappeared into the walls, if you find yourself asking permission to breathe, leave, and don't apologize. You've spent your life lifting others. You don't need to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. Live boldly, even if it means walking away. Especially then, I love you. And I trust you to know when it's time. James, that was all it took. I stood up, folded the letter, and tucked it in my purse. The house was quiet. Rachel had taken the kids to school, Henry off at work. The perfect stillness of an empty house gave me room to move, to breathe, to decide. I pulled my small suitcase from the closet, the same one I brought when I moved in. I didn't need much. Just a few clothes, my teaching books, the blue stationery James gave me, and that old jambalaya pan. I paused, looking around the room one last time. The walls were bare, the bed neatly made. There was no trace of me here, not really. I had come in quiet, and now I was leaving the same way. But this time, it wasn't out of shame. This time, it was my choice. Before leaving, I left one more note on the kitchen counter. Not for Rachel, but for the children. Lily and Caleb, Nana loves you more than words can hold. I'm going on a little adventure, but I'll be just a phone call away. Keep building castles, keep reading stories, and remember, kindness matters more than anything. All my love, Nana. Then, I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, pulled on my coat, and stepped into the morning sun. The sky was clear, wide, and full of promise. For the first time in a long while, I felt light. I didn't know exactly what came next. Amelia had said a few hours a week, just tutoring. But in that small offer, I saw a flicker of the woman I used to be, Miss Martha, the teacher with the kind voice and firm hands. The one who believed every child could bloom if someone just believed in them. And I still believed that, maybe even more now. As I walked toward the corner, suitcase rattling behind me, I realized I wasn't walking away with nothing. I was walking away with the one thing I still had, my self-respect. I didn't need applause. I didn't need permission. I just needed to go, and I did. When I stepped onto that bus heading south, I didn't cry. I didn't wave or look back through the window at Rachel's neighborhood with its clipped lawns and shiny mailboxes. There was nothing left to grieve, not anymore. Each mile that passed felt like peeling off an old, tight skin. The farther I got from the house I had once called home, the more I felt my shoulders drop. The heavy labels I'd carried, the burden, the problem, the guest who stayed too long, slipped off with every turn of the wheels. By the time I reached the coast, I wasn't the same woman who had stood behind a locked door, who had tiptoed through someone else's kitchen afraid to be seen. I arrived in a small beach town called Fairhaven, just a dot on the map, with a soft breeze and streets that smelled like salt and warm bread. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Quiet, slow, and gentle in the way that people like me need when they've been hurt for too long. The cottage I rented sat 2 blocks from the shore, painted a faded yellow with white shutters and a crooked porch swing that creaked when the wind came in. It was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but it had wide windows that let in the sun like it belonged there. No one told me what time to wake up. No one asked why I moved their mugs. I could breathe. I unpacked in silence, carefully placing each item in its new home. James's photo on the windowsill, my notebook in the top drawer, and my old blue scarf hung neatly by the door. I stood in the middle of the room that first afternoon, bathed in light, and whispered to myself, "You're here. You made it." The only person I had told about leaving was Amelia. She showed up the next day in a rusted-out pickup that sounded like it had survived 3 wars. She didn't ask questions, just walked up to me on the porch, arms wide, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like old books and rosemary. "You look thinner," she said, squinting. "I feel lighter," I replied. We didn't say much that first hour. Just sat on the porch, drinking coffee, watching the gulls drift overhead like they had nowhere to be. But after a while, Amelia leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and said, "I'm not surprised you left, Martha. I'm just surprised it took you that long." Her words landed like a jolt. For months, I had questioned myself, turned my pain into shame. But hearing her say it so plainly reminded me, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I had simply been enduring too much, for too long. And now I didn't have to. Amelia told me about the program she was helping with, an after-school literacy group for kids who were falling behind, children with broken homes, language barriers, or just plain bad luck. They need someone steady, she said. Someone who doesn't give up when the reading gets hard. I hesitated. "It's been a long time, Amelia." She smiled. "So, you still got the heart for it?" I nodded before I even thought about it. Because yes, underneath the grief, the silence, the months of being told I wasn't helpful, I still had that fire. The one that used to burn in classroom corners when a kid finally sounded out a full sentence on their own. That part of me was still alive. The first day back in a classroom, I felt like a fraud. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the whiteboard marker. The kids were rowdy, suspicious, guarded. One girl refused to make eye contact, her arms crossed like armor. A little boy in the corner kicked the legs of his chair for 20 minutes straight. But then I wrote the first letter, a big, round M, and just like that, I heard it, my voice. Not the hushed tone I used around Rachel's house, not the cautious phrasing I used so I wouldn't offend anyone. No, this was my voice, clear, firm, warm. M is for magic, I said. And for mistakes, we're going to make a lot of them here. And that's okay. The boy stopped kicking his chair. The girl glanced up, and I felt something click into place. After class, I sat alone at the front of the room, marker still in hand, and looked at the board. The letters stared back at me like old friends. I had found the part of myself I thought I'd lost, to motherhood and aging, to being ignored and boxed away. I was a teacher. Always had been. At home that night, I wrote in my notebook, my own kind of record keeping. Still a habit from Rachel's house, but now not to prove my worth to anyone else. This time, I wrote for me. Today, a boy named Evan asked how to spell ocean. When I told him, he whispered it under his breath, again and again, like a spell. I think he liked how it sounded. So did I. I wrote a full alphabet today. My hand only shook for the first 2 letters. By the time I got to E, I felt like myself again. I didn't make dinner tonight. I made toast and ate it on the porch with the sea wind in my hair. And I smiled. That night, I walked down to the water. The beach was nearly empty. Just a few distant figures and the hush of waves tumbling in, like secrets being spilled in the dark. I stood at the edge of the surf, toes in the cool sand, and closed my eyes. The sea didn't ask me who I had failed. It didn't call me a burden. It didn't need me to justify my presence. It just took me in, and I let it, because sometimes, starting over doesn't require fanfare or fireworks. Sometimes, all it takes is one quiet morning, one kind letter, one single step, toward the life you forgot you deserved. And in that moment, salt in the air, wind in my lungs, I knew I hadn't been erased. I had just been waiting to begin again. It didn't happen all at once. Finding myself again was slow, like the way morning fog lifts from the sea, quiet, steady, and mostly unnoticed by anyone but the person standing in it. I started teaching at the community center 2 afternoons a week. The building was nothing special. Cinder block walls, mismatched chairs, dry erased boards with old smudges. But to me, it was sacred ground. The moment I stepped inside, I wasn't someone's mother or an old woman with nowhere else to go. I was just Miss Martha, the woman with chalk on her hands and something to give. My students were a beautiful kind of chaos. There was Mia, 8 years old, wide eyes, and a stubborn heart. She struggled with dyslexia and hated reading aloud. On her first day, she slammed her pencil down and said, "I'm just dumb, okay?" I knelt beside her, touched her arm gently, and said, "Smart people get frustrated too. That just means your brain is working hard." She blinked at me like no one had ever said that before. Maybe no one had. Then there was Max, 9, recently moved from Guatemala. His English was still patchy, but his curiosity was sharp as a tack. Every day, he carried around a red notebook filled with words he'd learned and doodles of superheroes in glasses. I taught him to say courage by tracing the letters with his finger. He smiled when I told him it meant being brave, even when you're scared. And maybe that was what I was doing too, learning courage again, one chalk mark at a time. But the real shift came when I was cleaning out a kitchen drawer in the cottage one evening and found an old, soft-covered notebook I didn't remember packing. When I flipped it open, I saw pages of little stories, ones I used to tell Lily and Caleb at bedtime. Silly tales about a cat who talked too much, a mouse who painted clouds, a grandma who flew to the moon on a mixing spoon. I had forgotten, I wrote them down, forgotten how much joy I used to have creating for no other reason than love. That night, I stayed up until midnight with a cup of tea and a pen in my hand. I didn't write for the kids, or for James, or for Rachel. I wrote because I had something to say. That was the start of something new. A few weeks later, Amelia forwarded me a link to a national education forum looking for guest contributors. retired teachers sharing stories of impact, challenge, and change. I sent in a short piece on a whim. I called it, "The Day My Daughter Asked Me to Disappear." I didn't sugarcoat it. I wrote about the kitchen silence, the quiet corrections, the night I was asked to hide. I wrote about how it felt to be erased by someone I raised. And I ended it with something I hadn't even known I believed until I typed it. Sometimes, when your family turns off the light on you, you don't just walk away, you become the light yourself. The piece went viral. Within days, I had emails flooding in, mostly from women like me, grandmothers, single mothers, stepmothers, women who had given their lives away piece by piece and woke up one day not recognizing the reflection in the mirror. One email said, "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for telling the truth." Another wrote, "I'm not a shadow either. I'm writing my own story now." Each message made me feel less alone, more whole. Like maybe I had walked through that fire for a reason. Like maybe my voice, after all this time, still mattered. Around that same time, I started frequenting a quiet little cafe near the shore. Good coffee, bad muffins, but they had wide windows, and the owner always played jazz in the mornings. That's where I met George. He was a retired literature teacher, wore corduroy even in the summer, and had a fondness for quoting at the wrong times. We shared a table once when the place was full, and then again the next week, on purpose. He read the classics. I liked mystery novels. We argued about everything from Hemingway to haikus, and somehow, it always felt easy. We never labeled it. We didn't need to. We were two people who had learned how to sit with silence, who weren't looking to be saved, just seen. On Tuesday mornings, we'd talk about books. On Thursday mornings, we'd talk about life. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, and somehow, in that stillness, something bloomed. One evening, I walked down to the water just as the sky turned cotton pink and soft orange. The waves rolled in, steady, like breath. I sat on the sand and pulled my knees up, let the salt air tangle in my hair, and I asked myself the question I hadn't dared whisper in years. When was the last time I laughed just because I was me? Not because dinner was done, not because the kids were happy, not because someone else smiled first, but because I was full, I was free, I was enough. That night I laughed softly into the wind. Not because I had everything figured out, not because I had fixed the hurt with Rachel, but because for the first time in a long, long while, I knew I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was standing in the light and I had put myself there. It was a Tuesday, the kind where the sky is so blue it feels borrowed from a postcard. I had just come back from the community center. The kids had been wild as usual. Max had spilled glitter all over the alphabet rug, and Mia had gotten her first B on a spelling quiz. We celebrated with jelly beans and high fives. I was settling down with a cup of tea and an old Agatha Christie paperback when the phone rang. The number lit up, unfamiliar, but with the same area code I'd once memorized like my own reflection. For a second, my heart stalled in my chest. Then I answered, slow, cautious. "Hello, hi, Martha," the voice said. "It's Henry, Rachel's husband." His voice was quieter than I remembered, not clipped and busy like before, almost like he'd rehearsed something and didn't know where to begin. I waited. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Rachel found your notebook." I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The notebook he was talking about was the one I used to hide in the drawer at their house. The one filled with everyday nothings, watered the herbs, wiped down the kitchen sink, tucked Lily's blanket back when she kicked it off, made sure the porch light was on before sunset. That notebook had been my proof that I existed, that I mattered. "She read every page," Henry said after a pause. "Every single one." It wrecked her. Still, I said nothing. I held the phone to my ear like it might vanish if I let go. "She's not okay," he went on. "She keeps saying she didn't know, that she didn't see it, that she thought." He stopped. "She thought you were just there, just lingering." I let out a long breath. "Not bitter, just tired." "She saw everything you did," Henry added softly, "just too late." Another pause. He was letting it land. He knew he couldn't clean up the mess Rachel had made. He wasn't calling for apologies or forgiveness. Not yet. Just space, a crack in the wall between us. "I also know about the money," he said then, quieter. "The savings account, for the kids, that hit me harder than I thought it would. For over a year, I'd been quietly wiring a small amount each month into a college fund under Lily and Caleb's names. I never put my name on it. Never told anyone. I didn't want to thank you or recognition. It was just what you do when you love someone, even if they forget to love you back." Henry cleared his throat. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I finally said. There was silence for a long time after that, the kind that isn't heavy, just full. "She misses you, Martha," he said. "She said that." "No, not in words. But she hasn't been herself. She walks past the kids' room and stops, stares at the pantry where you used to keep your tea. She cries when no one's looking. I know she messed up. I know it was a lot." He sighed. "But you were always there, and now that you're not, she realizes what she lost." I blinked back, something hot in my throat. My fingers curled around the mug on the table, grounding me. "I'm not telling you this because I expect anything," he added. "I just thought you deserved to know. And Rachel's scared. She doesn't know how to fix it." I looked out the window. The sea was calm that day, rolling in easy waves. There was a little boy flying a red kite down by the sand, his mother standing behind him, arms raised to guide. Then came the question, if there was a chance, if she reached out, really reached out. "Do you think there's still a way for us to be a family again?" He let the words hang there. I didn't answer right away. I let the question fill the room. I thought about the nights I spent crying on that stiff twin mattress. I thought about the lemon squares untouched on the table, about Lily calling my name in her dreams, about Rachel's eyes avoiding mine across the kitchen. But I also thought about her little hands slipping into mine when she was 5, about the way she used to draw hearts in her peanut butter sandwiches, about the night James passed and she curled up in bed next to me without saying a word, because love didn't always need words. Finally, I said, "I don't know." I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just being honest. For the first time in a long time, I'm not the same person I was when I lived in that house. I added, "I'm not waiting to be invited back. I'm building something here." Henry didn't speak for a beat, then said, "Good. You deserve that. But if Rachel ever wants to talk," I said slowly, "not explain, not apologize, just talk." Then maybe exhaled like he'd been holding something in. "I'll tell her." "Don't tell her too much," I said. "Let her come when she's ready." After the call ended, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sky shift to amber. I thought about how strange life is, how love can both bruise you and carry you, how sometimes the people you love most are the ones who forget you're still human. But I also thought about healing, real healing, the kind that doesn't come with an apology or a grand gesture, but with time, with space, with the quiet choice to keep your heart soft, even when the world tells you to turn it hard. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I just lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and let the sea keep me company. Because no matter what came next, whether Rachel called, whether Lily ever asked for another story, whether I ever stepped foot in that house again, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't left my family behind. I had found myself again. And that was enough. I spent the whole morning cleaning, wiped down every surface twice, rearranged the flowers on the little table by the window, white daisies and wild violets, like the kind Rachel used to pick for me when she was 7. I even baked the oatmeal raisin cookies that Lily always said tasted like stories. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and home. It had been nearly a year since I last saw them. I hadn't expected to. Not really. But after that phone call from Henry, something settled in me, something quiet but sure. I didn't want to live with the door closed forever. I didn't want bitterness living rent-free in my heart. So, I reached out. "Come visit," I wrote in the letter. Not to fix things, just to be together. For a little while. They arrived just before noon. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and stood at the screen door, hands folded so they wouldn't tremble. Lily was the first one out of the car, gangly and taller now, but still with those same wild curls. She ran up to the porch and threw her arms around me so hard I nearly lost my balance. "Nana," she squealed, "I missed you." I held her tight, breathing in her little girl's scent, that mix of shampoo and peanut butter. Caleb followed, more reserved. A boy now, not a baby. He reached into his hoodie pocket and handed me something small wrapped in tissue. "It's Grandpa's compass," he said, not meeting my eyes at first. I thought, maybe you should have it. I used it when I missed you. It kind of pointed me back to you. My heart cracked right down the center, and I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take good care of it." Henry offered a warm handshake and a soft hi, "Mom." Before helping bring in a bag of fruit and some iced tea Rachel had picked up from a market in the city. It felt oddly formal, like visiting a neighbor instead of your mother-in-law, but not uncomfortable, just careful. And then Rachel stepped out of the car. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe just more tired. She had on a light cardigan, the one I gave her last Christmas, the last gift she hadn't returned or ignored. When she came up the steps, we didn't hug. We just looked at each other. I motioned toward the porch chairs. "Let's sit," I said. We sat in silence for a bit. The kids were inside, munching cookies and flipping through some of my old picture books. The breeze was kind. The sea murmured behind us. Finally, she spoke. "I read your notebook again. All of it." I nodded. She cleared her throat. "I didn't know. I really didn't. And I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. But I just want you to know, I see it now. I see you." There were no tears, no dramatic apologies, just words spoken through a throat tight with guilt. "I was grieving," she continued. "But that's not an excuse. I was selfish. I thought your presence made things harder. I didn't realize it made things bearable." I looked out at the ocean. "I don't need you to cry, Rachel," I said softly. "I don't need you to beg. I just need you to stop seeing me as a fixture. I'm not a piece of your furniture. I'm not a vase collecting dust in the corner." She nodded, slowly. "I know that now." More silence, but it wasn't bitter. "I want to make it up to you," she said. "The kids miss you. Henry too. We all do. If you want, you could come back, move in again. We'll do it differently this time." She meant it. I could see that. And for a moment, I felt it. A pull, soft and familiar. The idea of being part of that family again. Hearing Caleb laugh down the hall, brushing Lily's hair before bed. The comfort of what once was. But comfort isn't the same as peace. And I had found peace here. I reached across the table, took her hand in mine. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "thank you for asking. That means more to me than you know. But no, I won't come back." She blinked, surprised. "But we can make it right." "I know," I said, "and maybe we will, in our own way. But I'm not the same woman who left your house. I'm not looking to fit myself into someone else's story anymore." I smiled then, not out of pride, but relief. "I built something here, Rachel. For the first time in a long time, I wake up and my life feels like mine. Not borrowed, not tolerated, mine." Rachel lowered her eyes, nodded slowly. "I get it." We sat there like that a little longer. The sun shifted, and the wind picked up. Inside, Lily and Caleb were laughing about something. The kind of laughter that fills a room. "You'll always have a place in our lives," she said. "And you'll always have a place in my heart," I replied. "But that doesn't mean we have to live under the same roof." Before they left, Lily ran back to hug me again. Caleb did too. Awkward but real. Henry gave me a firm hug, whispered, "Thank you for still loving us." And Rachel. She turned to me at the car door, eyes damp but not broken. "Can we visit again?" "Anytime," I said. "But not because you feel guilty. Come when you want to see me, not when you need something from me." She nodded. As they drove away, I didn't cry. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt anchored, rooted, whole. I wasn't returning to their world. I had made my own. And maybe, just maybe, we could build something new. Not the same as before, but honest, respectful, real. Because that's the thing about love. It doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means moving forward, together, but apart, on purpose. I never thought I'd write a book. For most of my life, I wrote in margins, on grocery lists, in school notebooks, on little post-its I stuck on lunchboxes. Quiet things, necessary things. I never saw myself as the kind of woman who'd put her story between two covers and hand it to the world. But something changed when I found my voice again, first at the whiteboard, then on the porch, and finally, in that tiny notebook I used to hide in the back of a drawer. The words had been waiting. The title came easy. When they called me a burden, it wasn't meant to be flashy, just honest. A collection of memories stitched together with real life. Thread T. I wrote about the cold nights on Rachel's couch, the lemon squares that went untouched, the letter from James I found when I needed it most. I didn't write to get even. I wrote to get free. I self-published it through a small local press. It didn't hit any bestseller lists. No book tours, no big interviews. But something surprising happened. It found people. Women like me. Women who had been shoved aside by the people they raised, the husbands they cooked for, the friends who forgot to ask how they were doing. They started writing to me, not fan mail, sisterhood, letters scrawled in neat cursive or typed with trembling fingers. I thought I was alone. Your story was mine. Thank you for saying what I never could. I kept every single letter in a wooden box next to my bed. Every Sunday, George would show up with a white rose. Never a dozen, never red, just one white rose every week, like a quiet tradition between people who understand that some things don't need explaining. He'd knock once, I'd open the door, and he'd hand it to me like it was both a question and an answer. We never called it romance. We just were two people with their own rooms, their own lives, but a shared porch and a shared comfort in the silence. One Sunday, after setting the rose in its jar, he looked at me and said, "You don't shrink anymore." I smiled. I stopped fitting into the old spaces. He nodded, then reached over and brushed something from my shoulder. Sand, probably from my morning walk. That was all. That was enough. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mailbox with rainbow stickers on the envelope. It was from Lily. She had finished reading my book. "Dear Nana, I read your story. Mummy didn't want me to, but I did anyway. I think it's the bravest book in the world. I didn't know moms could mess up until I read what happened to you. But now I know even grown-ups can make big mistakes. I told Mommy I loved her, but I told her she was wrong to treat you like that. She cried a lot. I hugged her, but I wanted to hug you too. So this is my hug. In words. Love, Lily. P.S. I still have the locket you gave me. I wear it on hard days." I read that letter 3 times. Then I sat on the porch, held it in my lap, and cried. Not because I was hurt, but because I had been heard. That night, I went down to the beach. The moon was high, the waves lapping soft against the shore. I closed my eyes and let the sound carry me. And I heard him, James, his voice like wind against my ear. "You see, sweetheart, you came back to yourself," I whispered. I did. I stayed there a long while. Just me and the sea. No one calling me burden. No one expecting dinner. No one questioning where I put the spoons. Just Martha. Martha, the teacher, the writer, the woman who once disappeared behind closed doors and now walked with her chin up and her heart open. Sometimes Rachel calls now. We talk like 2 women learning each other all over again. There's no pressure, no pretending. Just small truths, traded gently over the phone. She sends drawings from Caleb, notes from Lily. She never asks me to come back. And that's how I know she finally respects the choice I made. Because this small, sun-warmed house by the ocean, this is mine. It's where I read, write, dance in the kitchen if I feel like it. It's where the tea is always steeped just right and the light never flickers out. This is where I'm not a shadow in someone else's hallway. This is where they call me Martha. And that, my dear reader, is enough. I've lived a quiet life, once a mother, once a wife, only to become a shadow in the very home I helped build. But there came a moment when I realized, if I didn't speak up, if I kept shrinking myself down, no one would remember I was ever here. I'm telling this story not to blame anyone, but to make one thing clear. Every one of us matters, and none of us were born to be ornaments in someone else's life. That includes you. We don't need anyone's permission to live true to ourselves. Don't trade away your voice, your identity, or your joy for the sake of family, or in the name of sacrifice. Real love doesn't come from endurance. It comes from understanding and mutual respect. So I want to ask you, the one who's watched this video all the way to the end, if it were you, if you were in my place, treated like a burden by the very people you love, what would you do? Would you keep enduring in silence, or would you choose to stand up and step out of the shadows? I truly want to hear your answer.